Today we're going to engage in the Analects of Confucius, probably the best text in order to link to the teachings and writings of Confucius. Certainly more reliable of text in order to understand Confucius than any other text. So what we had you do within our anthology of primary text was read just a few pages of the Analects. So you got about 6 or 7 pages. So we want you to take a look at those and see if there's any definable doctrines, any consistency in teaching and philosophy that you see in Confucius. So what really are the doctrines of the Analects? Within the teachings of Confucius, we certainly see deliberate tradition, this idea that you need to know what came before, that you need to be able to spontaneously and naturally love tradition, to be able to naturally respond to it, and to act appropriately because it is your very nature, more than it's something that is taught to you or that is in some ways something you do because of coercive influence, but that you truly become someone that enjoys learning about history, that enjoys learning about tradition, that enjoys following those traditions. That filial piety is not something that you follow, but something that you are. And so really we talked about this last time, was this idea of the Zhou dynasty and the golden age of harmony, right? This idea that it's not a progressive movement, it's in some ways looking back in time. And so what I'd like you to do is to look at the parts of the Analects that we had you read and find one that really speaks to you, that really has something in it that you believe is applicable and is relatable and effective. And so I'm going to give you a couple of ones that I like. One of my favorite verses, and maybe one of the challenging verses, is the first verse of the Analects. And it says, "The master said, 'Is it not a pleasure, having learned something, to try it out at due intervals? Is it not a joy to have friends come from afar? Is it not gentlemanly not to take offense when others fail to appreciate your abilities?'" So what I feel like this first verse of the Analects is saying, the opening salvo of Confucius, is really talking about engendering and cultivating those attributes that allows you to enjoy service, that allows you to enjoy bringing friends in and being the host and taking care of others, and the humility to build in abilities for their own sake, not for the recognition, not for the benefits that may come, but to work towards sagacity, to cultivate oneself for its own sake. Now, some of the things that challenge me about the Analects is that it does look like a very old text. Some of the ideas of whether the Analects can speak to modernity, there's some of the verses that look like it just doesn't, right? Some of the ones I looked at, the master said, "I transmit, but I do not innovate," right? We often think in our world that innovation is an intrinsic good. Confucius is saying, well, have you learned all the lessons from the past? So to innovate without learning from the past may put us on a path that we don't know how to in some ways use and benefit from those innovations. So it says you want to transmit, you want to in some ways just slightly tweak the principles and doctrines that have been given to us and that have stood the test of time. And it says, "I am truthful in what I say and devoted it to antiquity. I venture to compare myself to our old pang," right? So constantly always looking back, right? Looking back to our elders, having this this humility, having this honor, this respect for what came before. Another one in 15:16 it says, "There is nothing I can do with a man who is not constantly saying, 'What am I to do? What am I to do?'" So he is talking about a humility and a self-awareness and a self-criticism that always will be reflecting about not only the right thing to do, but the proper way to do it. And one more that I like that I want to share with you is, "The master said, 'A man is worthy of being a teacher when he gets to know what is new by keeping fresh in his mind what he is already familiar with. So again, we don't extend ourselves. What we do is we learn new applications of things by reiterating, by going over those things that we already are familiar with. So he really would be someone who, instead of reading 1,000 books, what you need to do is find a really good book and read it 1,000 times, right? Do not go on to something else until you truly know what you are already familiar with, what you have previously read. So in a lot of ways, he's saying, principles don't change. Men's understanding, people's understanding of those principles change. And if you truly want to be innovative, I think this would be a very Confucius thing to say. Sometimes innovation is just so ancient, no one else remembers it, right? And so, especially in ethics and morality, that can be the case. These are just some of the things that I love about the Analects. It certainly is an amazing book that one could read for a lifetime and certainly become better. Use it for moral cultivation and for spiritual development. So that's your task. Look back at the pages that you read, pick the one that is most applicable, and then analyze it and introduce the 35 other people in the class to this verse that they had already read, right? Have them go back to what's familiar and use your analysis to give them further and more significant insight.